and welcome back to Building Extraordinary Brands, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of creating standout brands and businesses. Today we have a remarkable guest who has nearly 2 decades of experience in the world of branding and creative strategy. Steven Picanza is a creative brand strategist who's helped numerous brands identify and bring their purpose to life through evocative ideas, award-winning campaigns, and compelling consumer experiences. Steven specializes in building, repositioning, and marketing brands. His diverse background includes roles in creative brand strategy, brand planning, experience design, allowing him to bring thoughtful, comprehensive strategic plans to his clients. He's achieved significant professional milestones, including creating a Super Bowl commercials, multiple award-winning campaigns, and he's even been nominated for a Cannes Lion. In this episode, we're going to delve into the 4C framework and discover how it can help businesses create compelling and impactful brands, along with practical applications and success stories. So, welcome to the show, Steven.
Good morning, Jacob. How are you? And hey, everyone. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Awesome, mate. I'm going to start with your journey, just so we have a bit of context. How did you get into brand, and what's your approach to brand building?
Yeah, my journey started, I'm a musician. I still play music, and I've always played music. And so, early,
What do you play?
I play guitar. Mainly I play guitar, but I also play drums. And growing up, I played a bunch of horn instruments. And I actually,
I can see you playing the drums, actually.
Yeah. And here's a little tidbit of information. I was in the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney as a musician. Yeah, so I was part of the big march. There was a 2,000-piece marching band, and I was there. And I also got to play at the Opera House and a bunch of other places. And we stayed in a town called Bathurst for 3 weeks, college town. Cool. As a musician, right? So I'm playing in a band. I'm 18, and we put out an album, and someone's got to get us gigs. Someone's got to start marketing the band, and this is pre-internet and whatever. So, I went out there and just started hustling, knocking on doors, and started doing that, and that kind of got me interested in marketing. And then as a musician, naturally, just because of my personality, I started doing improv theater. And I started doing improv comedy, which then led me to do an internship with the company that I was doing improv with as their marketing manager on their street kind of, promoter. So that kind of got me going in the marketing world. I'm on the beat, and I'm trying to book gigs and everything. And one of my fellow actors at the time was starting to dabble in design. And so we just started collaborating and talking about projects. And I never really wanted to have a real job. And so I was we would meet at coffee shops, and we actually started our first agency. And this is circa 2007, 2008 now. So started our first agency and saw some minor successes, and, worked with a lot of clubs. I was living in San Diego at the time. So, working with a lot of clubs and bars and restaurants and doing all that kind of work. And then, ultimately a couple of years later, it was after the economic downturn, the Great Recession, him and I decided we were so young, let's part ways. No harm, no foul. Love you, bro. You got to do you. I'm going to do me. And then I started, and this is where my agency journey really took off. So I joined an agency, and the first account I was working on was the Mirage Hotel and Casino. It was the rebranding for them. They're in Vegas, a powerhouse. And I loved this agency I was working with. And then from there, after about a year and a half, I left and joined another agency as a freelancer working on strategy. It was part strategy, part branding. Really before brand strategy as a profession, as a thing, what really came about. And then for the next, I would say 7-8 years as a as a consultant, freelancer, I took on various roles with different agencies, whether that's fractional CMO or as a strategist. I was just kind of immersed myself in the branding and marketing world, kind of doing a lot of different of everything, whether it's social strategy or content strategy. I ended up starting a podcast in 2015 after I delivered a keynote in London about podcasting. And so I did one that was all around, it was called the Creative Hustler Podcast, which was all around living at the intersection of creativity and business. Kind of like what Chris Doe's doing a little bit with The Future, but there was a little bit there. I was like a digital nomad. I was living in Europe for a little bit. And then fast forward, I ended up joining one of the big boys. I ended up joining the McCann family in 2021 and was with them for a little bit. And then from there, I moved over to another agency called Curiosity for a year and a half. And this is where I got to work on some amazing, amazing, amazing brands that we're going to cover later on, as well as the Super Bowl spot and, getting, nominated for a Cannes and all that fun stuff. And now I'm just out there, the Branders Magazine podcast host, and we're all great friends. And it's really trying to bring a unified voice to all of us branders and give us all a platform. And so I'm obsessed with branding, and I can't push a pixel to save my life. So we'll start there.
No worries. You got the thinking in there, and what a diverse background. Thank you so much for sharing that, mate. Yeah. So when did this 4C framework come into the picture?
It's really an advertising framework, right? And so 4Cs really is a way that we mine for insights and we synthesize data, right? And the 4C stands for macro to micro: culture, and then category and competitors, consumer, and then the company and the brand. And this is how it's a framework to dive deep into research and to just truly understand the inner workings of everything that surrounds the brand. Well, coincidentally enough and interestingly enough, like every major agency has their own version of it. When I was in the McCann family, they had the 6Cs. And there are other ones that have the 3Cs. And, it's like, us branders and strategists, we all love frameworks, nauseatingly love frameworks. And so I just started to see a thread of like, well, if we take this idea of the 4Cs and really we just use it as guideposts to understand certain facets of the business, well, we can really build good advertising campaign, but we could also get to the root of building really good brands and really good foundationally sound brands. And there's a thread there. And I've just really been intrigued by that thread and have started to use it, whether I'm helping to come up with a big idea from an advertising perspective or trying to find the brand positioning and the brand truth so that we can further, connect the brand to their audience while it's, rooted in their goals and where they're trying to go. It just kind of all works. And something I think that like a lot of brands can start to look at themselves through the lens and come up with some interesting shit about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to understand that process in more detail, especially for our listeners, right? Like how could they follow a framework like this if they aren't really that familiar with it? So I want to strip it back, go back to basics, and just maybe we run through a particular process you would go through, like each of the 4Cs. What order would you do it in, and how would you gather insights from each of these 4Cs?
Yeah, again, macro to micro being it's the company, the brand. It's super ownable. There's not like maybe you're only working with, a couple years of a legacy or a couple years of history. And, the company part, oftentimes, what is the positioning? What is the vision? Is it still aligned to where, they want to be going? So that's like the small, minute part. And, as much as we would love it to be so linear, you work on culture and you come up with that and then you move on to the next part. I mean, it's so chaotic where, when you are in the research mode, you're kind of absorbing everything and trying to figure out where it all goes, the giant puzzle. So I start off with culture. Like, what is the cultural impact that this brand is having on society? Is it adding to the cultural zeitgeist or the cultural narrative that's out there? Or is it, is it attention focused where it's just adding to more attention? So like, what's happening and why is it important? I think that's something that a lot of brands need to ask themselves more is like, well, why is the problem that you're solving actually meaningful to not just consumers or your cohorts, but to the world? And that's the big thing to think about. And so ultimately, we start to look at what's being said from news articles. We start to look at what's being said in trend reports. We start to see what's happening, headlines, and we start to see like, what is that common thread here? So for example, when I was working, I did a lot of work with Dude Wipes on helping them formulate their brand strategy and then turn that into an advertising campaign. And as we were going through the 4Cs, obviously there's guidance that the brand gives us. They may know who their mortal enemy is, but maybe it's not the right mortal enemy, right? In the case of Dude Wipes, their mortal enemy was toilet paper, right? Because they are a flushable wipe for male. So who is, the enemy? And ultimately it is toilet paper. But you can't be so, from a cultural perspective, we need to be sensitive. Like, we can't go and shout out from the top of every building how bad toilet paper is, because you ultimately need toilet paper as a category entry point. So that might be the next C down. So for that brand truth, for example, for Dude Wipes, it's like, hey, our mortal enemy is toilet paper. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for this. It's bad for that. Yada, yada. You build up like what that truth is. Then the next part is like from a category and a competitor perspective. And sure, you could break those two things up, and that's okay, right? Like, it depends on how mature your category is. Are you, a category of 0 or a category of 100? Like, it's really subjective based on the organization and where it lives. But we want to look at the category as a whole, and are you really in that category? Like, so for example, for Dude Wipes, are they in the flushable wipe category, or should we start to think about them in the toilet paper category? And ultimately, we decided, no, we want to be in the toilet paper category because we want to be stealing that market share, and we want to be chipping away at that market share. So let's swim upstream a little bit and let's stay there. So we start to look at category drivers. We start to look at, like, how is the category moving and how are people receptive to that category? Does that category have a mortal enemy that we all need to be, going against, or can we start to own a different segment of that category through our positioning? And then also that's going to lead us into looking at the competition itself. So, we want to start to, obviously we SWOT the competition. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? What can we steal from them? What might they steal from us? The give and take. And then we want to obviously map out, right? Like, sometimes we look at, even if we wanted to look at an XY axis, like, what's a really interesting way to map out these brands so we can be uniquely ownable? How can we be the only one that can talk about these drivers? Ultimately, for Dude Wipes, it's like we can be the only toilet brand that can talk about community, because there's no other toilet paper brand that has a community. Charmin doesn't have it, Cottonelle doesn't have it, private label doesn't have it, but Dude Wipes has it. So, okay, so this is we're starting to kind of find our ownable space. And with that comes out truths, right? Listen, everyone else can have their 5 minutes of fame or whatever it is, but we're going to stay here because we're staying relevant and we are adding to the fabric of the future, as opposed to just being an archaic product like toilet paper, as an example. The next, as we kind of go down that pyramid, we had culture, we have category, consumer. The next one is, category and competition. The next one is consumer. And this is where we got to put on our social listening hat and really try to understand what the hell are people saying online, right? So it's not just, the meta platforms, but are there interesting, TikTok trends that we're seeing that are very particular or very specific to the brand? For the case of Dude Wipes, we started to see that doomsday prepping was a thing. People were just kind of stockpiling wipes and just kind of having it. Or we started to see how people were storing their wipes. And we can look at this with any brand. I mean, let's just take, for example, the Stanley Cup, right, that everyone has, right? There's a certain level of consumer chatter happening online. Whether you are pro Stanley or anti Stanley, that's still adding to the narrative that the brand needs to manage, in a sense. So by social listening, we could truly understand what is that sentiment that our consumers have of the brand. Is it a positive sentiment? Is it a negative sentiment? In the case of Dude Wipes, the big anomaly, and we don't see this often, is as other brand, like, their community management that Dude Wipes did was so great, and we pulled a lot of this into our strategy work. Like, if another brand, if Chipotle posted something about National Burrito Day, Dude Wipes would respond saying something like, hey, you're going to need us tomorrow. And more often than not, the the comment would receive more engagement than the actual post. And this is a phenomenon that was like, wow, like the compound factor that Dude Wipes has is truly interesting. Let's explore that even more. And that became a huge part of how we're going to activate the brand and how we're going to execute the brand. So by doing a lot of this social listening and this consumer listening, we're starting to understand what is the problem that the brand is actually solving versus what the surface might be, right? The problem for Dude Wipes wasn't necessarily that we're just not clean. It might just be a confidence issue, that we want to feel more confident in our day. And that's really what we're trying to solve here. And then finally, it's the company part of the C. And this is really where it's like, where has the brand been? Where is it now, and where do we want it to go? Right, we're going from a startup story to a mature brand, ultimately to an IPO. Great. Well, how are we going to get there? Does our mission and vision and purpose reflect where we're going, or is it still based on our startup mentality? Are our reasons to believe actually reasons to believe from our consumer mindset, not just based on subjectively what we think it is, but is it objectively based on what our consumers are thinking? So that's where we start to get into the brand building process. And so out of the 4 C's framework, eventually getting down to the company parts where brand strategy then takes off. At least is how I started to rework this framework.
Yeah, very comprehensive, and I love the example that you've used, applying it to each of those categories. I'm wondering, for small businesses or let's say freelancers listening to this, how would they implement this effectively? Because there's a lot of things going on there, and you can see your experience shining through. But if someone's going through this like for the first time, how do we simplify the steps to like the basics and to actually make it practical, I guess?
Yeah. I think the hard part, Jacob, is you almost need a facilitator here. And this is because there's going to be too much subjectivity that comes out, right? If it's a small business, founder, owner operator or founder led, they're going to have their own. This is why this brand is relevant to society, right? And they're going to have their own take on it and their own subjectivity. And it might be the right hypothesis, but it may not be. So you need someone, a sparring partner. You need someone to pressure test, whether or not like we're chasing where we're digging the right holes. In advertising and branding, oftentimes we say we're digging a lot of shallow holes. We're going to dig a lot of shallow holes, and we're going to really see which ones need to be dug further versus which ones we can just cover up. It's not worth digging anymore. And it's hard if you are running your business as an entrepreneur and a business owner. It's hard to just kind of completely separate yourself from the business to think objectively about the cultural implications your brand has, or what your competition is doing really well and why they are stealing market share. Oftentimes I think founders or entrepreneurs just want to kind of sweep it under the rug. I don't want to know about that. Like I'd rather, right, out of sight, out of mind, and it doesn't impact me. It takes a lot of hard questions, a lot of introspective, a deep look at your business.
Okay. Well, maybe we flip it and, talk about the pitfalls that people fall into, like when they're using a framework like this. What are some mistakes that you often see?
I think it's easy to fall into safety, into the safe. Here's the thing, like the best insights that that agencies or strategists or branders come up with for businesses often are really bold and provocative. And to an outsider's perspective, like that's cool. But when you're on the inside, provocative is dangerous, right? And provocative means perhaps expenditure. Provocative might also mean like, just being scared to execute, right? Like I was having a conversation earlier with an agency CEO, big agency. And she was saying like, we really, the C-suite has to be courageous. And I think courage is an interesting thing in branding, because you have safe and then you have like revolutionary, right? And you have everything in between. So I think ultimately a lot of small business owners think that to be revolutionary, to be bold, to be courageous, it takes a lot of money. While that might be somewhat true, I've seen brands operate on a shoestring budget that just had so much conviction in their thought and were just able to get like that right level of of insight that turned it into strategy, that turned it into execution. And it wasn't a monetary thing. It was just you had the courage to ask those tough questions. So ultimately, a framework like this is extremely useful, and anyone can think about it because we all understand culture and category and consumer and company. Like we understand what that means in concept. I think it's the challenge of yourself as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, or even as a strategist, working with this framework on their clients, to ask why, to ask why again, to ask why again. I mean, to really drill that in, because that's when the magic happens. It's when we break that veil of safety or that safety net. And that's dangerous for a lot of people because we lose control, and people don't want to lose control of their business. But I promise you, the shallow holes that you'll end up digging will be beyond your wildest imagination. Like you'll never. This is how Jacob. This is how brands like Liquid Death came about, right? Yeah. That's so stupid. It's fucking water in a can. But they just asked the why, found their mortal enemy in plastic, and just kept going, and were able to create a category disrupting brand. And that's really exciting. I think every business has an opportunity to at least think like that a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit of yeah, I like
a little bit of
of course. Sense. When you think about Liquid Death, like the idea of just a can with water in it, it's like why hasn't this been done before? Like there's just so much soda out there that is made in cans. Like why not water? So
I know.
It seems so simple, but the way that they've done it, I think is crazily unique and just wacky, which why it stands out. It is bold and courageous, as you mentioned.
But ultimately, the product's not different. Like it's not like it's made from Mars water. It's not made from anything weird. It's
water. I spoke to one of the marketing guys. Sticks is his name, from Liquid Death, and his approach, his thoughts were that it was actually unique in the water because it was from a particular spring. I can't remember what he said, but that's his I guess spin on, like, it is a little bit different, but it's really the marketing if you really think about it. Of course. Yeah.
I mean, here on the East Coast, I mean, you got New York in you a little bit. I mean,
Poland Spring.
Yeah, Poland Spring is everywhere. And like, is this any different than, of course, this is a unique spring. So I think it's at the beautiful play on positioning right there, right? Absolutely. Well, this comes from a really, really unique spring. It's like Fiji water. Come on.
Yeah, totally. But that's what all the water brands are doing. And I think, even brands like named after mountains, like Mount Franklin or whatever, Alpine Springs or whatever it is, it's definitely not Liquid Death.
Indeed. Funny story. And I guarantee he's not listening to this. I had somebody reach out to me who is trying to put together the antithesis of Liquid Death and calling like holy water, or going that religious route. Yes. And bottling water in a can, but trying to serve that population. And I was like, at first I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But I was like, actually, you might be able to find an audience. I'm sure if you do the right marketing and the right branding, you can find an audience. And then he showed me his label, and I was like, you're not going to find an audience with that label. Don't ever use that font again.
Oh, right. Wow. No, I saw someone else do a holy water brand as well.
But interesting. Anyway,
yeah.
Riding coattails.
All right. Well, let's talk about some other examples, like maybe case studies or success stories, whether it be from your brand, your expertise, which you've shared, Dude Wipes. But, is there any other projects or examples that come to mind that our listeners could learn from?
Yeah, even if I was working with a larger cruise line, Holland America Cruise Line. This is recent, maybe within the last year, and we had launched their campaign. Campaign was in market. Campaign was doing really well. We had touched their branding a little bit, but it was more on the visual ID. It really wasn't touching brand strategy. We didn't really have the opportunity to touch brand strategy, but we leveraged the 4 C's as a way to show the brand, to continue to show the brand our level of thinking and our thought process, and how we're just constantly proactively thinking about the positioning of the brand and how to make it better. So we started to look at the 4 C's through the lens of we're not trying to find the big insight here. We're not trying to find something groundbreaking different for the brand. We're just trying to find some truth statements or some truths in what the brand is doing or what they're not doing as it pertains to the 4Cs, so the brand could be better. Because as strategists, we're not looking for prediction, right? We're looking for preparedness, right? We want to not help the brand predict, because you can't really predict where markets are going to go. You couldn't predict COVID. You can't predict these things, but you can really help the brand prepare. And I think that's something that it's as much as it's a defensive move, it's also an offensive move, because Ben Franklin said this, right? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I think a lot of brands, they get complacent, they get comfortable. And when they start feeling comfortable, their market share starts to get chipped away. And we see it time and time again with brands here in the States that this is happening always. So anyway, for Holland America, we went through a really deep exercise. This is the past agency I was at, deep exercise of 4Cs, just to say, hey, brand managers and CMO, this is how we're thinking about the brand. So from a culture perspective, we were thinking about wellness. We were thinking about gastro, right? We're, food and beverage. We were thinking about entertainment. We were thinking about all these other cultural implications that not just cruise lines, but just tourism in general. So for us, culture was like ecotourism, gastrotourism.
What was the brand say?
Holland America Cruise Lines.
Cruise lines. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So for them, we were really, just trying to give them fodder, trying to give them expanded thoughts on, hey, if you're not already looking at bringing in something that talks about these particular instances into your business strategy over the next couple of years, maybe you should, right? We're seeing consumers change. We're seeing not just, hey, historically Holland America is for the older generation. Let's call it the boomers. Well, if you only focus on the boomers right now, when the boomers die off, you're going to be effed, because you didn't think about Gen X, millennials, or in this case, Gen Z. And our research, fascinatingly enough, saw that there was a gap, that there was a lot of boomers taking their Gen Z grandkids on cross-generational cruises, and cross-generational travel actually became a thing. And funny enough, in the time of this recording, I'm going on a cross-generational trip in 2 days with, people who are 80 and my son who's 2, and we're all going to, we're going away for the week. And this is actually a really big thing that is happening within tourism. And while they knew this at the brand, it was eye-opening for them to see our take on it, because of course they're stuck in the day-to-day. And so oftentimes they can't take that 85,000 foot viewpoint on what's happening. So it's really good. And it's a really good exercise to just show your clients proactively, I got heart for you, and I'm thinking about your business and the longevity, right? That long-term plan to outmaneuver the competition. I'm thinking about it, and I'm just doing it through this construct just to make it easy, so I'm not throwing up on you all these disparate random thoughts. They're kind of organized in a way that builds a greater story.
Yeah, I think that organization is so key, because that's what we do as facilitators. Like we're researching all these different areas, but we have to make sense of it and
Exactly
get those insights, get those truths, and communicate it effectively to the client of why it's important, and actually what to do next is like the next question. So that's my next question to you, is like you getting all this data, but how do you make informed decisions? How do you get them out of this comfortable box that they're in and show them the future and get them on board? That's a really challenging gig.
That's the theater of what we do, right? Like, there's an art to presenting. It's not easy, and it's because you equally don't want to just read verbatim what's on a slide. You have to give a voiceover. You have to give a narrative to it. You have to have different tonal inflections to take people on that journey with you. But when we present this, and oftentimes. And again, it depends on usage. If we're using this to build out an advertising campaign, ultimately this 4Cs framework is hopefully going to lead us to that big insight, right? To to that thing that is like, that's what we're going to latch our advertising on. So for the example of Dude Wipes, the big insight after going through the 4Cs and all this research was so simple. Wet cleans better than dry. That's it. Like, I mean, think about it. Like, wet, anything wet is going to clean better than dry. Stop wiping with dry toilet paper and use something wet. Like, that became the rally cry, became the big insight. It's what I briefed the creative team on. It's what they made the ads on. We went into market with that. And it's all around that giant insight. But using the 4Cs framework, that may not always be the end point. Sometimes you might want to do it like I showed you, or I just told you in the case of Holland America. It's just to say, hey, we got to be prepared. These are trends that we're seeing, or this is what we're seeing in the market. This is the movement we're seeing within your consumer cohorts. So like, I think we have two ranges right there. But from a branding perspective, if we're actually creating a brand, it hopefully will help us solve the right problem for that brand. I think sometimes brands think they're solving one problem, but in reality, you are actually solving a different problem. And it just takes problem reframing or reframing the challenge for the C-suite of the founder to say, aha, that's exactly right. Case in point, yesterday, I'm on the phone with a very small nonprofit out of Seattle working in the poetry space. And they got this really cool thing going on where like they do like this postcard fest. So within the summertime, you know, you have all these people writing postcards to people and everyone's sending postcards to each other with original poems. And there's a lot of like, you know, put down the cell phone and do this or whatever. And as I'm talking to the founder, he doesn't know it, but I'm asking him questions. And in my mind, I'm using the 4Cs framework. And I'm asking provocative questions for each, and I'm writing it down. And then ultimately, as I got to the company part of it, I asked him, like, tell me, like, what would we put up a flagpole? Like, tell me, like, why you're doing this. And he said, well, I want 10,000 people to be, you know, getting off their cell phones during the summer and writing poems on postcards. And I was like, that's it. Like, that needs to be that's your line in the sand. That's what we need to like put up on the flagpole. Like, you're here to impact 10,000 people every year to get off their cell phones and write more poetry. And like, that's our rally cry. And it was like, I got an email from him today, Jacob. He was like, you know, Steven, I haven't been able to sleep since you said that. I've always used that 10,000 thing, but the way you framed it and the way you just illuminated what it is I'm doing and why just has completely turned around how I'm thinking about the business. So that is the aha moment that we're trying to spark. And they might seem so simple after the fact, but oftentimes getting to them, it's just a process of just being, just asking a ton of questions, doing your research and navigating within these four constructs to get to that aha moment.
Okay. I have two follow-up questions around the provocative questions you asked and also your presentation formula. So I'll ask the provocative questions because I think everyone has a different approach to, you know, go through their process in their mind. But like, what questions do you find most powerful to get, you know, that juicy data?
Yeah. Questions that are not like, if you're going to ask a question of like, who's your competition, you're going to get a certain answer. But if you reframe the question to my social media feed is full of ads from your competitors, convince me to choose you over them, you're going to get a whole different set of answers, right? And they're going to tell me who their competitors are in that answer, but they're also going to give me how they might pitch their business. They're going to tell me their reasons to believe. They might tell me like their positioning, right? They're just going to give me an answer I'm looking for a little bit differently. Or another question might be, instead of asking like, hey, are you interested in brand activations? Maybe you say something like, if there was an artist or a musician that could do a private concert that represented your brand, who might that musician be? And they're gonna be, oh my God, I want Metallica or I want Beyonce and I want them to do it at Central Park or whatever. And then you start to understand, where are the limitations of thought? Where are, what is going to get them to, what's going to motivate them to give up more answers? And we're going to tap into something really emotional. And so I'm always trying to if I'm trying to get a rational answer, I'm asking it in an emotional way. And it's just something that I've just, I'm not the only one who does this. And it makes the questions a little bit more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like instead of like, hey, if you were to open up a new gym, if you're a gym brand, if you were to open up a new gym around the block, like how would you do it? Well, how about you ask, like, if you were to open up your gym on Mars, how might you go about promoting the new gym opening on Mars? Then you'd be like, what? I don't understand. And then they might say, well, I would like to wrap the moon with my logo and do this. And then you're like asking super weird questions, but weirdly enough, you're building trust with your audience. You're building camaraderie with the clients. They're finding it fun and exciting. And it's not just like another question and answer session. And now you're engaging in like a true conversation. That's effing awesome. And you're going to get some really cool answers that way.
You'd be a very cool facilitator, Steve. The energy and the questions and just the vibe it's good. It sounds like good fun.
Right on.
That other follow-up question. So the presentation formula, you've got all this data and there's an art to it. Do you have a particular framework you use for like presenting your work?
I had a past agency relationship where we called it slideware. Like, what's the slideware that we're going to present? And okay. I'm going to go a little technical, and then I'll go a little bit more like philosophical, I suppose you could say. Technically, like it's either like a Google Doc, like a Google slide sheet, Google Slides, or like a PowerPoint. And I'm big into animations. I'm big into building the slide. So it's not like the slide comes and all the information's there. It's part of the storytelling where I want almost line by line to build it out with me. First of all, I don't want people to get bored. I don't want them to read ahead either. And I want to really keep people on the edge of their seats. So like that's just kind of how I do things. And I've worked in teams before with teams that don't do that. And I often find that I get a little uncomfortable if like I'm showing all the answers before I get there, right? Because it's just like then they're not following me. So that's a technical perspective of it. From a philosophical point of view, I don't necessarily have like a framework to follow if I'm presenting something. But I will say that I give things, I enjoy to give things space. So like even if I was briefing the creative team on a strategic territory or whatever it is, I might be building out like one word or one line per slide and giving it room to breathe. So it's not like a brief on a page that has everything there. I might deliver that at the end, but it's like, no, this is the problem we're solving. This is the brand edge we have. This is our reasons to believe. Here's strategic territory. Here is, the one thing people need to know. And so like I'm trying to build it always and crescendo it to something, right? And I think that maybe that's more of the art form. It's a crescendo. So you're really kind of starting small and everything is kind of layering and building on top. I just find that really, really works. But there's no like, I have like, this is my presentation, my framework of presentation and that I use it. I'm always kind of tinkering with it, but it's going to follow a story arc and it's going to follow, leverage. And maybe it's a musician thing. Now that I'm saying it, I don't even think about it, but like the musician thing, right?
As well. It's like,
crescendo, the diminuendos and like pausing sometimes and like taking a breath. Like I obviously you can get this right. I could be a fast talker. So like, if I think that I'm really being slow with something, I know there's a dramatic effect that's happening. And like, yeah, sure, it's psychological and I'm trying to play this game, but I want people's attention when we're presenting something. I don't want anything to get lost. So I think that's really important.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom around the 4C framework and presenting and sharing your story as well, Steve. It's always a pleasure. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah. And thanks again, Jacob, for having me on. It really is an honor. You can connect with me. My website is stevenpicanza.com. And from there, you can navigate to all my different business ventures, whether it's the agencies I run or consult with or my studio that I own. And also at brandersmagazine.com, where I am the host of the Branders Magazine podcast. And from a social media perspective, really, you can just find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on all the other platforms. I'm just not active there. My mental health is way too important to try to be everywhere for everyone. I'm keeping it to one thing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, mate. It was good fun. So I'll see you online.
Appreciate you.
Building extraordinary brands.